to me. Ever seen one of these? This is a new one.
Into the wind.
This'll pack a punch. The lightning echoing song.
Let's keep going, team.
You're stuck now.
Happy New Year everyone, and I figured for the first video of the year I wanted to do a fundamental guide on Aloy, specifically looking at probably one of the biggest complaints that people often have about Aloy. We're here with Aloy and Masanori, and of course the most fundamental complaint is not her that she doesn't do enough damage. I'm talking about specifically people's difficulty in achieving Ice Rush on demand, because if you have a look at any of my gameplay, I seem to achieve Ice Rush quite readily, and so I wanted to share my thought process behind basically playing Aloy and getting Ice Rush to happen. So, we have here a team that doesn't exist, okay? Aloy and Triple Animo is not a thing, don't worry about that, but I'm mainly using these three characters to sort of demonstrate the various levels of achieving Ice Rush. So we'll start off with the most basic level of achieving Ice Rush, which is just basically baiting enemies, in this case Masanori, into the bomblets. What I find is getting some distance between, in this case, Masanori and Aloy tends to help. Especially because you can then sort of let Masanori or whatever enemy it is run into those bomblets. And whilst you may think, oh my god, that that delay between us throwing the grenade and getting the bomblet to actually hit Masanori afterwards, that was so long, that actually can be useful in various rotations afterwards, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're playing French Aloy, for example, you might actually want to use that delay to set up more of the rotation before you start doing your normal attack, so that you have all 10 seconds of your Ice Rush's duration, and thus making full use of it. You basically want to try and get as much Ice Rush uptime as you can, so having a bit of a delay on that Ice Rush is actually not a problem. Now, of course, that's just simply baiting enemies into your bomblets, which can be a little bit weird sometimes, especially if you're going up against particularly mobile enemies. So we do have a few characters that can help with that, and obviously we are of course talking about a lot of the Animo characters. I'll start off with Sucrose, who in my opinion is like more difficult to use than, say, Jean or even Kaz. But Sucrose has a really good, well, not really good, but Sucrose has two levels of like bomblet grouping. First you have her skill, which tends to work unless you die, so that's not ideal, but then we can actually do that. But the idea is that you can use Sucrose's skill to group bomblets. But when Masanori is too far away, you might notice that Sucrose's skill, it doesn't exactly work. It can work, but it is a little bit finicky. And when you start comparing Sucrose's skill to other Animo options like Jean or Kaz, you'll find that Sucrose is often more difficult to group Aloy's bomblets than other characters. That being said though, Sucrose's butterfly is very good, because it actually sucks the bomblets into Masanori, making it a lot easier to achieve Ice Rush. Of course, this particular Ice Rush here was achieved with Masanori actually hitting some of those bomblets, so that helps a lot as well. Sucrose's butterfly is a lot better than Sucrose's skill. Here's to hoping that Cloud Retainer can group up bomblets as an Animo character, but I don't know if that's going to be the case. But speaking of Animo healers, we have Jean. And Jean is actually cited as a pretty good teammate for Aloy, especially now that Farina exists. So in a French Aloy team, you can actually choose to play Jean alongside Shenhe, for example, and you actually get a pretty good team. But then you run into the problem of how difficult it is to actually group those bomblets.
Ever seen one of these?
So Jean's grouping of the bomblets is actually pretty good. And if you happen to have constellations, you also get that attack speed as well, so that's really, really nice. The thing is, though, Jean's grouping of bomblets does require her basically to hold her skill, which involves actually staying in place for a while. So it's not exactly ideal, not my favorite, honestly, but it is something that you can absolutely do.
Got something for ya.
Standing a little bit far away from Masanori seems to do the trick, so that you can let those bomblets slowly hit Masanori. You don't want them to all hit simultaneously. If you stand a little bit too close to Masanori, sometimes it doesn't work. And finally, we have my preferred option, which is, of course, Kazuha. Kazuha, of course, is a very sought-after character for a lot of teams, mainly because of his damage bonuses. But from Aloy in particular, it's less the damage bonuses and more the fact that he can group bomblets a lot easier than other characters like Jean and Sucrose. So,
Ever seen one of these?
the thing about Kazuha is that his hold skill can vacuum the bomblets together, so you basically need to be strategically trying to find a way to group those bomblets together, but also into Masanori, if that makes sense. And so that's basically how I've been approaching Aloy and Kazuha for the longest time. But on top of that, I've actually been using the delay that I've been talking about before of letting Masanori and whatever enemy you're fighting sort of naturally hit those bomblets accidentally, because they often do. And by letting them also hit the bomblets naturally, you can get some of those extra stacks, because that way you avoid something like this, where you accidentally group those bomblets too well and then you don't get Ice Rush. So the plan, the idea, instead, is let the target hit a couple of those bomblets, maybe try to get your stack counter to 2 at least, before you swap over to Kaz and then do the grouping. If you happen to accidentally do it wrong and you end up with 3 stacks like I currently did, then, you know, you can just throw your grenade and start normal attacking with Aloy. And then you'll definitely have Ice Rush. Hey guys, this is Kate the Editor. So I totally forgot to talk about Sacrificial Bow. Sacrificial Bow is a bow that allows you to recast the use of your skill whenever your skill actually does any damage or hits at all. And that includes bomb and bomblets, which means you can actually use Sacrificial Bow as a way to even easily achieve Ice Rush. The idea is basically to throw your first bomb and maybe get 1 or 2 stacks of your coils first, and then throw your bomb again, which will give you your 3rd stack, and then your bomblet should also give you your 4th stack, thus achieving Ice Rush. So it is actually quite easy to achieve Ice Rush with Sacrificial Bow, but on my builds with Aloy, I do find that I lose about 500 attack from 2,500 down to 2,000 attack, so keep that in mind. So it's kind of like this thing where you don't want to go too ham with Kaz, or Jean, or Sucrose really, or any of them really. You kind of don't want to go too ham with your grouping technique. You kind of want to try and let it naturally happen first for a bit before you swap over to your grouper. And usually I think the best way to look at it is wait until Aloy gets the energy particles from her skill, unless you're playing, let's say, Freeze Aloy with Thundering Pulse, in which case you'll swap over to shun her anyway, so it'll work out, kind of. And then group those bomblets into whoever you are fighting. When you're fighting against multiple enemies, it can get a little bit trickier, but I do find that just maintaining some distance and chucking the bomblets at the group seems to make a little bit of a difference, because then you have a lot of enemies who are going to walk into different bomblets. They usually can walk into different bomblets at different intervals, and that should work fine for the 0.1 second cooldown that you get on coil stacks. It's a little bit of an annoying cooldown to work around, but that is why using Kaz a little bit too gung-ho does end up screwing you over. So I guess in the end, as a conclusion to this guide, try to naturally bait enemies into bomblets for a little bit, or let them walk into the bomblets anyway, because they probably will, depending on how you've thrown them. And then get your grouper to do it for you. Or if you're feeling particularly hilarious, then just let them sort themselves out completely. If you do somehow manage to get a natural 4-stack without the grouper, and you're playing someone like Kaz, for example, then a quick swap into Kaz and then you get the damage percent and then you just move on from there. So that's basically how that works out. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. Hope this helps, because that's basically my mindset as best described by me whenever I'm playing Aloy and grouping bomblets and trying to achieve Ice Rush, because yeah, it is a bit of a tricky thing. I'm not sure if it's necessarily nuanced, but it is a bit tricky to do. But I think once you get the hang of it, Aloy feels a lot better to play, for sure. And evidently good enough that I constantly play her. Well, not constantly, but I seem to play her a lot more than 99.9999% of the community. But otherwise, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.
One of these?
Bye.
Cryo incarnate.
Game's up. Follow me. Adorn my night. The wind knows me.
Take your true form. The hunt is on. Do your master's bidding.
Things are about to get dicey.
Transfiguration. This is a new one.
Busted.
This'll pack a punch. Manifest. By ordinance divine.
Here comes the catch. One with nature.
The hunt is on. My will and